Welcome to today's webinar, Leadership for Direct Care Staff and Coaching Strategies for the Workplace. My name is Hilda, and I will be your operator for today. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. I would now like to turn the webinar over to Michelle Lochner. Ms. Lochner, you may begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Quality Health Associates of North Dakota, I welcome you to this webinar, Leadership for Direct Care Staff and Coaching Strategies for the Workplace, with our featured speaker, Leasa Novak. Thank you for being patient as we all log in and get into the call. It takes just a couple of minutes for the operators to get all that information because we have so many states involved. So with that, this 60-minute webinar is a learning and action activity for the North Dakota Nursing Home Quality Care Collaborative and Healthcare Acquired Infections Work Group, the Great Plains Quality Innovations Network, and the Grade 8+ group of QIN QIOs working to support healthcare improvement in 18 states. Those states are Alaska, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. During this webinar, there will be a live chat box function that we encourage participants to use for comments and questions. I and my colleague in Nebraska, Crystal Hayes, will be monitoring this for anything that needs to be addressed to Ms. Novak. The phone lines are on mute right now, but we will open the lines at the end of the webinar for questions. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our Great Plains QIN website, greatplainsquin.org, along with the handouts in approximately 7 to 10 days. It will also most likely be available and posted on the websites of the other QINs that are represented in the Grade 8+ work group. So please contact your state QIN QIO contact for additional details. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Leasa Novak. Leasa combines her 2 decades of experience in healthcare with her passion for coaching to bring new insights to today's healthcare leaders. Focused on relationships, quality, and improving the lives of all who give and receive care, Leasa has a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication and is currently completing her master's coursework in organizational behavior and executive coaching. With nearly 12 years in the Quality Improvement Organization program and her direct care experience as a nurse in long-term care settings, Leasa is committed to supporting transformational change in today's healthcare environment. Welcome, Leasa.
Michelle, thank you so very much for that introduction. It is such a privilege and an honor for me to be here on this call today and to have an opportunity to connect with so many healthcare leaders across the country. So we had a lot to talk about with this topic today, and if it's all the same, we're just going to jump right into these slides. And before we do that, though, I want to just mention, with the background that Michelle shared with all of you, just how excited I am. And I want to convey that excitement to everybody on the call. When it comes to the topics of leadership and teamwork and coaching, it really allows me to combine my professional experience with my educational experience and the background I have, and to bring it together to look at some new ways that we might approach the topic of quality improvement in healthcare. So that's enough about me. What I'd like to do is find out where all of you are coming from on the call. So Jennifer, I know we have a polling question to find out if people are mostly coming from the hospital setting or long-term care. If we could get that polling question up, and if everybody on the webinar could take just about 30 seconds or so to answer that question for us, it will help us get a better understanding of where everybody is dialing in from today. So with that said, we're going to wait. Looks like we have about 12 seconds or so, and after that we can get some responses. And hopefully, we have folks calling in from all of these healthcare settings. So, this topic is something that applies no matter where you work, really no matter what healthcare setting you're coming from. So we'll give it a second to get those results up. And I think it might take us a few seconds to actually get the results posted, so we'll be patient. And there we go. So it looks like a good portion of the folks that are dialed into the webinar are coming from the nursing home setting, with a portion from hospitals. We have a couple of home health agencies, a couple of physician offices, and several folks that represent other parts of the healthcare system. So it looks like we have a nice mix. So thank you for taking time to answer that question for us. We have one more polling question as we get started, just to better understand where everybody's coming from. So we're going to put up one more polling question, and it's on the screen already. Do you consider yourself a leader, is the question. And it's a simple yes or no, just to get the conversation started. So I'm guessing that a lot of people are gathered together in a group, or maybe there's several of you in the same office. So if that's the case, just designate one person to answer the question from your group then. My hunch is that the majority of people on this call will identify themselves as a leader. And, you know, one thing that I love about this topic is that we all have the same opportunity to use leadership skills. And what I mean by that is that it makes no difference if you have a formal position of authority or not. You still have an opportunity to use your own leadership skills, and at the very least to have an impact as an informal leader in your organization. So not everybody gets to be the CEO, and not everybody can be the chief nursing officer. But if you have passion, and if you have desire, and if you have that awareness that what you do impacts other people, then you're in a prime position to stand out as an informal leader at the very least. And this is true whether you work in nursing, whether you work in the dietary department, the environmental services, or anywhere else in the organization. So here we have the results on the screen, and it looks like the overwhelming majority do consider themselves to be a leader in their organization, and that's exactly what I would have suspected. So for the next hour, what we want to recognize, though, is that when it comes to leadership strategies, we can all sort of, you know, check our titles at the door, so to speak, because the playing field that we have in front of us is a level one. And by that I mean that we're really all equal here, regardless of what our title is or what our position is. So as we get into the presentation today, then, I want to start with just establishing what a definition is for coaching, because I think this is something where everyone has a little bit different interpretation. So on the slide here, we have two definitions of coaching. One comes to us from the International Coach Federation, and that's a global association of professional coaches. They say that to coach is to partner with the client in a process that's thought-provoking and creative in order to inspire the other person to maximize their personal and professional potential. The other definition we have comes from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, or ARC, as we call them for short. So ARC says that to coach is to provide guidance, feedback, and direction in order to ensure successful performance. One of the most important things about coaching is that a coach believes that their client is capable. They believe that their clients are resourceful and that they have all their own answers. And it's just the coach's role then to help that client find those answers for themselves. So it's not that the coach is the expert. It's not that the coach is the one who has all the answers. The coach is simply the one to facilitate that process where the client finds those answers on their own. So with that said, there's no one right or true or correct definition of coaching. In very simple terms, coaching can be thought of as a simple process where, you know, we work with someone in order to achieve better outcomes. So what does that process look like then? In a nutshell, coaching is, or at least can be thought of as a conversation that has a specific focus. So the person being coached will typically bring a topic to the table. And the topic could be anything from, you know, maybe there's a problem they want to solve, maybe they're feeling really stuck, or they're having a hard time getting some momentum going. Maybe they just want to think about some new ways to approach a situation. Maybe there's a new skill that they want to develop. So, for example, maybe they've been asked to give a presentation and they're terrified of public speaking. So developing new skills is something that we can work on in coaching. Maybe the person knows what their problem is, they know what it takes to, you know, move past it, but they just want additional clarity or they want some accountability as they make changes. And we see this pretty often when it comes to things like whether it's, weight loss or people that want to quit smoking, that accountability partner can really help make some huge difference. So then the coach provides a series of coaching tools, and, that gets translated through these conversations or these dialogues. And there's a lot of different coaching tools. There's a lot of different methods. There's a lot of coaches in the world who have their own unique ways of doing things. But as these dialogues happen, whether immediately or over time, what we see generally is, results at the end. So the person who was being coached on, a particular problem has found a way to solve that problem. They've maybe developed some new awareness. They have a better perspective of, what they can do to make a difference for themselves. Or, whatever the outcome is that they were focused on, typically, something is different then by the end of this coaching process. So with that common understanding then of what coaching is, we want to talk today about how these techniques can enhance communication and how they can even help us strengthen relationships. So with that, then I have a question, and perhaps people can chime in on the chat box. But the question is, what does it matter then? What are some of the reasons we should care about relationships and communication in the workplace? So what's the benefit of addressing these topics today? And if you want to go ahead and chime in on the chat box, we'd love just to see your comments on this. Why should we care about relationships and communication in the first place? Okay, I see somebody typing in collaboration for the benefit of morale. Communication is key to patient safety. Somebody after my own heart there. Employee satisfaction, relationships are everything. Wow, you guys are really great with these comments. Staff retention, staff buy-in, customer service, inspires confidence. I think I might hang up and go home. You guys have all these great answers already. This is great. So, I would venture to say that as human beings, communication and relationships really help us, it sounds cliche maybe, but it helps us create the fabric of our lives. And so if you think about a world where we don't have relationships with one another, or we don't communicate with one another, what would that life look like? It would be a strange planet for sure. So I really believe that these two concepts come together to give meaning to our lives. And when we apply that thinking to the organizational level, then, the ways that we relate to each other, the way we communicate with each other, impacts everything. And, we just saw the whole chat box full of comments on some of those things. So, in my opinion, the patient safety, and I see somebody else posted that, patient safety really is the number one reason that we should care about these topics. So we're going to come back to patient safety in a moment, but first I just wanted to make mention of safety in another industry, and that is the airline industry. And, although we do hear about plane crashes, the unfortunate tragedies that still occur from time to time, overall the number of fatal accidents has decreased quite a bit in the last 20 to 30 years. So we have data here from the Aviation Safety Network. And so in 2014, the number of fatal accidents was down to just 21 of the major airliners with 190 fatalities. So considering all the many flights that take place every day around the globe, traveling by air is still a fairly safe way to travel. And as we can see, safety improvements do make a difference in those outcomes. So let's turn our attention then back to healthcare. And maybe some of you were around when the 1999 landmark publication To Err is Human came out. I've gone back and reviewed that recently. In 1999, the IOM released this report, and it was titled To Err is Human. And in this report, they shared some results from studies that were done showing the tens of thousands of American lives that are lost through what were deemed to be preventable medical errors. So this report served as a wake-up call for a lot of government and healthcare leaders around the country, around the globe actually. But after the release of this report, one organization that began addressing the topic of patient safety was the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and we mentioned them earlier, AHRQ, AHRQ. So here we have two screenshots from two different reports from AHRQ, and these are the aggregated composite scores for the patient safety culture surveys. One on the left is from hospitals and the one on the right is from nursing homes. So the hospital version, and these were both released in 2014, so they're fairly recent. The hospital version contained data from 653 hospitals, and the nursing home report contained data from 263 nursing homes around the country. And if you're not familiar with the survey, it's administered to staff to assess how they perceive the way that their organization addresses patient safety culture. And the survey measures 12 different domains, as we can see here on the slide. I know the print is a little small, but these 12 domains encompass things like teamwork and communication, feedback, staffing, supervisor expectations, etc. So on this composite report, then, it gives us the percentage of positive responses to the questions that make up each of those domains. And as we can see at the very bottom of both reports, and I've circled it in red, the domain that scored the lowest out of the 12 for both hospitals and nursing homes is the domain that represents the non-punitive response to error. And again, that is the same for both hospitals and nursing homes. So on this slide here, we have a close-up of what that domain entails. So we have the 3 questions that make up this domain, both for hospitals as well as the nursing home version. And, you know, the wording is somewhat similar, but I'm sorry, the wording is a little bit different maybe, but it gets to the same thing, which is how do staff perceive the ways that their organization, you know, responds or follows up when a mistake happens. And so you might look at these questions and say, well, you know, what's wrong with having this type of, you know, punitive response? Are we not supposed to hold people accountable when mistakes happen? And, of course, the answer to that is, yes, of course, we definitely need to hold people accountable when mistakes happen because, you know, there are repercussions when things go wrong. And if, you know, a policy is being violated, for example, or if somebody is not following a procedure, then, you know, consequences may still need to be imposed. So we're not saying we're going to throw accountability out the window, but what we are saying is that maybe there's another way, an additional way, that we can begin to make some improvements in the safety culture. So after the ILM released their publication in 1999, there was a subsequent report from them, and that was called Crossing the Quality Chasm. And this came out in the year 2001. And in this report, the ILM said that our biggest challenge to moving toward a safer healthcare system is changing the culture from one of blame to one of using those errors as opportunities to make system improvements, thereby preventing harm. So again, that was the ILM statement in 2001, and I just find it, you know, interesting that in 2014 we're still seeing that non-punitive response to error as the lowest scoring domain on the ARC surveys. So again, we're not talking about eliminating the accountability piece, but instead to shift our cultures so that we're all learning from mistakes that happen, so that we're learning from those near misses that come up, so that we're, you know, understanding what went wrong or what almost went wrong, so that we're preventing that harm and not letting the same things happen over and over again. So our challenge then is to hold our staff accountable while creating an environment where it's safe for them to speak up, where they're not reluctant to bring concerns to the table. You know, we want to create an environment where we're all learning together as we identify problem areas, and where we're solving those problems through making changes to the system, not just saying, well, something happened and you know, we wrote up the staff member or, you know, they're terminated, they don't work here anymore. Because, you know, when you stop and think about it, you know, again, we're not saying to not hold somebody accountable, but if we leave it at that, then we're putting blame on the person without fixing the system. And when that happens, that leads to that culture where staff are reluctant to speak up. They're fearful of being, you know, the one who's going to get in trouble next time. So, you know, in my research, one of the articles that I found here recently says that safety improvements and innovation are not likely to occur in a culture where team members feel that they're being blamed or that they're afraid of or ashamed of making errors. And, when you think about that, it just really makes sense. And putting all this together, we want to make sure that we're fostering a culture of safety and that we're not fostering that culture of fear or blame. So looking at the rest of the domains on the ARC survey, we see that a lot of these domains have to do with things that we've mentioned already, the teamwork, the communication, how do supervisors and managers communicate their expectations, how do we get feedback, what do those transitions and handoffs look like across units or, between departments or between healthcare organizations. So a lot of these domains then really have to do with, how do we deliberately create that culture where staff feel like they're being supported and that we're all learning, from, either what went wrong or, again, what almost went wrong from those near misses. So the question then, as I see it, is can we use coaching techniques then to help improve the culture? So we know often, that we have this punitive culture. We know that we have tools available to us to assess our culture, to measure it, and to quantify, the culture in these 12 domains. So can we use the information from the patient safety culture surveys? Can we recognize that, if there's a punitive culture, that there are some things that we can do to move in a direction where we have those system improvements happening? So we know that getting all staff to the table for this conversation is really, really critical. And, especially the ones that are providing direct care, the staff members that are closest to the patient, they have an important voice that needs to be heard in this conversation. And I think, too often we're not hearing it. And I'm wondering, does their reluctancy, prevent them from speaking up sometimes? So, finally, we know that we can do some team coaching around this topic so that we're creating better awareness about how we respond to errors when they happen. So that's, in my opinion, where some of these dialogues can begin to occur. So that was a really long introduction to this topic, but I wanted to really set the stage for why it's an important topic. So here we saw the sample coaching process a little bit earlier, and what we want to do now then is turn our attention to these coaching tools here in the middle of the slide so that we can start to think about how to use some of these techniques to improve our culture. So we have 4 different coaching tools that we're going to spend our time on, and it's important to mention that, again, there's literally hundreds of coaching tools and techniques out there in the world. But today I just want to focus on some of them that I think can really help us begin to make a difference in how we communicate and relate to one another in the workplace. So with that said, we're going to start with the topic of establishing trust. And establishing trust is, one of these coaching competencies that's represented from the International Coach Federation. It's actually one of their competencies. And, I'm not a Latin scholar whatsoever, but when we look up a little bit about the origin of the word trust, we see that it does come from the Latin language. And the Latin root word is fides. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but fides, which means they have faith or they have confidence. And we see some of the other English words that come from that same root word. So we have fidelity, and that is something that implies faithfulness. We see the word affidavit, and that's a sworn statement that something is true. And we see the word bona fide, which means that something is authentic or genuine. So I'd like to invite everyone to stop for a moment and think about a person who you trust implicitly. You don't have to question their motives. You don't have to question their behavior. You don't question their values. You know that the two of you are in sync. You're on the same page. You have their back. They have yours. So I'm hoping you can all identify somebody, whether it's a family member, maybe it's your best friend, but somebody who you know that you can count on. Okay, so I'm hoping everybody can think of at least one person, and I'm hoping that you're all feeling, kind of warm and fuzzy right about now. And so next, I'm going to ask you to think about someone who maybe you've crossed paths with, somebody who maybe you learned from the hard way that you couldn't trust them at all. So isn't it true that with these people you feel like something is a little bit off? Maybe there's something wrong with the relationship. You're always on guard when they're around. Now, hopefully you can't identify too many of those people in your life, but I'm guessing that's something we can all relate to. So we know pretty well what it's like to trust others, and we know what it's like when we can't trust others. Let's turn the tables on that. What's it like to be trusted? What's it like when somebody has that little of confidence in you? And I'd love to see some answers in the chat box on that question. What's it like when you know somebody trusts you, that you have their best interest, that you're not going to do something to bring harm to them? So if you feel so inclined, go ahead and share in the chat box. When someone comes to you with a situation or a problem or needs help, doesn't it feel good to know that they're coming to you because they believe you can help? Okay, so I'm seeing some people chiming in. It feels secure, there's pride, self-worthiness, happiness, empowerment. Okay, you feel valued, you feel worthy, for sure. So then you have a situation where the other person feels safe enough to come to you and supported enough to really open up. You know, that just, I don't know, for me, it makes me feel all these things that you guys are typing in the chat box. So maybe it's hard for the other person to really open up that way, but they do because they trust you. So as a coach, when we talk about establishing trust with a client, we do so in order to establish that comfort level, to create that atmosphere where the other person feels that kind of safety and they can say what's really on their mind or in their heart. So as you might imagine then, when we take time to deliberately create trust with another person, these simple actions can lead to that space where together we can be open, we can be transparent, we can be honest with one another. We can create a space for vulnerability to happen. And, you know, vulnerability gets a bad rap sometimes, but it's not always a bad thing. Now, I suppose if you're a baby gazelle on the African savanna and, you know, it's August or September, then being vulnerable might get you in a little bit of trouble. But in the workplace, without having that safe space where you can have these open and transparent dialogue, I'm afraid that we're shutting down some possible opportunities where we might be able to make those deeper and more meaningful connections with one another. So as leaders then in healthcare, we want to demonstrate to others that yes, we can be trusted, because otherwise staff are maybe going to continue to feel fearful of bringing up their concerns. So how do we do this then? The first few bullet points here probably go without saying. Confidentiality, of course, is of utmost importance, and we certainly don't want to talk about people when they're not part of the conversation. Acting ethically, keeping our promises, these are just good rules in life anyway, so those are kind of self-explanatory. When it comes to demonstrating respect or demonstrating concern, though, we want to slow down a little bit. I think it's really easy to inadvertently judge somebody. And, you know, I know in my own life I've certainly been guilty of this. But when we judge someone, we're not respecting them. And just as an example, you know, suppose that we work together and I'm on your team. If you ask me to join yet another committee and I tell you that I just don't have time, you know, I can't go to another meeting this week, I don't have time, are you thinking in the back of your mind that I'm just another one of those, I don't know, one of those lazy nurses from second shift maybe? So we need to be very careful that we're not making those kinds of judgments. And, you know, I see this all the time. And I think it might come from, you know, the silos that we work in. We don't really know a lot about our coworkers sometimes. We don't know the people who work on the other shifts. We don't know the people who work in other departments necessarily. But, you know, since we don't know them that well, it's quickly to assign labels to them. And I think that's why we see that, you know, there's this us against them mentality sometimes. And like I said, I'm just as guilty as anybody, you know, where you say, oh, well, you know, night shift doesn't do anything around here. Well, you know, because we don't have those relationships, we don't have that strong relationship sometimes across departments or, you know, within our teams even. I think that leaves us wide open to be susceptible to making these judgments sometimes. So we need to just be aware of that. Another thing we want to recognize is that sometimes people are a little bit resistant, but when we're wearing a coaching hat, we want to make sure that we're not pushing them. And instead what we can do is use some gentle nudging. So I think it comes down to knowing what techniques, each person responds to the best. And just to go back to the committee example, if I tell you that I really don't want to join when we're a committee, but if you remind me about the benefits of my participation, or if you ask me, what my objections are to joining the committee, then we can have a real dialogue about where I'm coming from. And our conversation, is truly representing that partnership, but it's not just a one-sided conversation. So if I tell you that I just don't think I have time to sit on one more committee, and if you respect that, then maybe you can work with me to help me juggle my priorities, or maybe you'll find somebody else to take my spot. But as my leader, I really do want you to listen to my perspective about that. So one more really simple technique to help build trust is to ask permission to talk to somebody about a potentially difficult topic. So you might say something like, well, gee, Leasa, you seem a little bit reluctant to talk about this. Do you want to maybe come together another time? Let's talk about it tomorrow maybe. Or you might say something like, is it okay, Leasa, if I give you some feedback about the way you just talked to that family member? And then, of course, we have to respect what those answers are. We have to respect people's boundaries. But meeting the other person on that level will demonstrate to them that, you really do care, to the point that you're willing to respect them when they say no. So these are just some really simple things that we can do just to kind of re-ground ourselves in the trusting relationship. Next, we want to talk about coaching presence. So we can think about our presence as the way we present ourselves, or how we show up with another person. And this can include our attitude, our emotions, our moods, our stress level. It's really our demeanor. It's where we are, where we're coming from, both mentally and emotionally. And when we talk about having a coaching presence, it means that we're deliberately showing up in a way that is open and attentive to the other person. We're being flexible, we're being confident, and it also might include using our intuition or being spontaneous, if that seems to be what's needed. So it's about going with the flow, but in a confident and in an open way. Coaching presence is also about creating a place where both of you in the conversation are equals, you're partners. And as I said in the beginning of our presentation, the coach is not the expert in the client's life, so the coach can deliberately create that place where the other person is equally validated and respected in that true sense of a partnership. So this coaching tool goes a long way in helping us create a conversation where the other person does feel validated and acknowledged. It helps us to create a partnership, where that respect and that rapport can, begin to take root and develop. Honesty and synergy can really emerge once we create this type of presence with one another. So when we're deliberate in establishing our own presence, we can then use that to acknowledge and affirm the other person's presence. So, for example, if you and I are having a coaching conversation, and I'm the one wearing the coaching hat here, I come to that conversation as a coach feeling completely centered. I'm not being distracted by anything. I know what the focus of our conversation is going to be. And our conversation is my only focus right now. So I can then totally zero in on you and where you're coming from. And that allows me to pick up on any subtleties or any nuance about what might be going on for you. And then I can reflect those things back to you. And so again, this is just a way to really, validate and acknowledge the other person. And that's really huge. So let's stop and think about some times, maybe in your own life, when somebody has recognized you in that way, or acknowledged you, or acknowledged where you were coming from. So just as a simple illustration of this, when's the last time you passed somebody in the hallway, for example, and you said, oh, hi, John, how are you? But then, you kept on walking. And, so John may or may not have answered that because he realized you didn't stop to hear his response. So, and this is something that happens all the time in the real world, right? You go to the grocery store and the cashier says, oh, how are you today? And you wonder, do they really want to hear how I am today? But when somebody says to you, hi, John, how are you today? And they wait for your response, and they even comment on your response. doesn't that tell you that that connection with you is really important to them? So just think about the message that it sends to the other person when you're really totally present and zeroed in on somebody. It can be incredibly affirming and empowering to be noticed, I think. So how then do we go about creating this kind of coaching presence? Well, obviously we want to be fully present in the conversation. So set aside the electronics, turn off the ringer on your telephone, shut the door so that there's privacy. Whatever it takes to let the other person know that they really have your full attention. So other things you can do include making sure that you're, in control of your emotions. So, you don't get all fired up when somebody's pushing your buttons, for example. So here we want to watch our tone of voice and body language. So think about, what the message is that you're, conveying, through your body language. And know that it's okay to use your intuition sometimes. You could say something like, well, my gut is telling me that you'd rather not pick up any extra shifts right now. Am I right about that? So that intuition is accessible to all of us, and I, really encourage, everyone to tap into that. We can also use humor here and there. I wouldn't overdo it with the humor, but sometimes, at the right place in the dialogue, that can add a little bit of levity. So don't be afraid to use that. One really important thing we can do here is to clarify meanings. And, rather than just making an assumption that you know what they're saying, don't be afraid to ask them to elaborate. So, you might say something like, well, tell me more. What do you mean when you say you've had enough? What does that mean to you? I think I know what you mean, but in your own words, tell me what you mean by that. So asking people to clarify is a way to get them just to continue talking, to continue that dialogue, and often you can get them to, share even, more detail that can help further that dialogue a little bit. So another thing we can do is not get entrenched in somebody's story. And when we say we don't want to get entrenched in the story, we're talking about not getting hung up on every detail that the other person is saying. And, we probably all know those folks who are really good storytellers and they like to draw things out. And if you find yourself saying things like, and what did she say next? And what did you say after that? And what happened next? Well, there's a pretty good chance that you're entrenched in that story. And, of course, it's okay in some situations, but with our coaching hat on, we want to make sure we don't get too involved in somebody's story because then we lose our perspective. We have less objectivity as we're trying to help them. So not being able to see the big picture can be a hindrance in that situation. So, in that kind of instance, we just want to gently interrupt the other person and say something like, wow, Mary, it sounds like you just really had a bad night last night. Instead of letting her go on and on and on with everything that went wrong on her shift. So we want to, in that case, be able to help Mary get to the bottom line. What's the gist of what she's trying to say? Another thing we want to avoid is speaking from our map of the world. And I see here that I've got a missing word on the slide. So that should say, don't speak from your map of the world. So our map of the world is the way that we sort of filter or process information. And, it's determined and it's shaped by everything that we experience in our lives. So did we grow up on the East Coast or the West Coast? Did we move to this country from somewhere else in the world? Did we graduate from college? What are the religious values we have or the political values we have? Who are we, when we get to our values? So it's easy to assume that other people are a lot like us. But we might say things that they really have no frame of reference for. And a simple example of this is when we use too much jargon or too much medical terminology to people that aren't, clinical. So that can also be applied to these cultural norms as well. We just want to make sure that we don't assume that everybody understands life the same way that we do or that they have the same values that we do. Okay, so coaching then, and having a coaching presence really helps us to connect with somebody in a way that feels authentic for both of us. Okay, so our third coaching tool then is active listening. And don't you just love the picture on this slide? this dog is I think an embodiment of what it means to be actively listening. So for this, we want to just truly think of ourselves as a sponge for all that's being said and all that's not being said. We want to use our ears, but we also want to use our eyes and our brain and our heart. We want to listen between the lines. We want to hear the underlying message that somebody is trying to convey to us. So naturally, we want to use our ears to listen to their words and hear that language, but we also want to look for that nonverbal communication in the body language and piece that together with everything else that we're seeing. So, for example, if you smile and tell me that you'd be thrilled to pick up that extra shift, this weekend, but you're also clenching your teeth and making a face, and your tone of voice tells me you're angry, I might be inclined to say something like, well, gee, I hear you saying that you're willing to work extra shifts, but I'm wondering if that's really what you want to do or not. So we want to piece together all the information that we're taking in as we listen very actively. So again, it's listening to the essence of what the other person is saying. And of course, when we do that, it's amazing how deep that connection can really get. Have you ever just been so entranced in conversation with somebody that you lose track of time? That's what listening actively can really do for us. It helps us build trust. It helps us establish that coaching presence. Those things really are all linked together. When we're good at listening, we can improve our synergy and come up with better ideas together. And the conversation can just take on a whole new flavor, really. We can identify, some of the nuances between us. We can ask better questions because now we're just really tuned into, each other in a whole new way. So we can reduce the possibility of any confusion. We can make sure we clear up any misunderstandings or assumptions. Because now that we're really listening, we can get a lot of clarity about what the truth is. So, what do we do to listen actively then? Well, in terms of the how-tos, the first thing that comes up is using idiosyncratic language. And for the nurses on the call, we know that we do this all the time, and we call it a check-back process. We do this when we get a doctor's order, and we repeat it back to them to make sure we heard it correctly. So it's when you repeat verbatim in somebody else's words so that you're confirming that you've got the right message. So as an example, suppose that you have an angry family member who came to you and said that her mother didn't get the eggs and toast she was supposed to have for breakfast, and instead she got oatmeal again. So you could say something like, oh, so you're saying that your mom got oatmeal instead of eggs and toast. So the benefit in doing this is that the other person knows, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they've been heard, and you heard them so well that you're actually using their own words back to them. So, of course, with this, there's always a chance that it could backfire, and the other person might say, well, of course that's what I said. Weren't you listening to me? And so if that happens, that's okay. Just use it as an opportunity to let them know that you're truly trying to understand and that you want to make sure that you've heard them correctly. So managing distractions is something else that's really important here. Of course, in today's world, it's hard to eliminate all the distractions we have. But when possible, put the phone away, turn away from the computer. Don't multitask when you're in the middle of an important conversation with somebody. Another thing we want to talk about here is internal chatter. And I certainly hope I'm not the only person on this call who can identify the internal chatter in my head. Many of us come equipped with that nagging little voice inside our head, and it's the voice that, I don't know, sometimes it might be judgmental toward other people. Other times it's just that voice that says, I wonder what to make for dinner tonight. Do I need to stop at the grocery store on my way home? So it's a voice that kind of takes us off track from that moment where we're having a dialogue with somebody who's right in front of us. So being able to identify when that internal chatter starts taking our attention away is really, really important. And lastly, we, of course, don't want to interrupt the other person. We don't want to make assumptions. We talked about that with the judgments earlier. So the last coaching tool that we have is the topic of powerful questions. So the important thing about asking questions then as a coach is that we want to understand the reason that we ask questions in the first place. And so think about this with me. In the course of your workday, how often are you asking questions in order to get information? Okay, so there's somebody who needs an answer. Maybe your boss needs an answer. You're looking for some answers. Maybe you're asking questions to get some data or some numbers. Maybe you need an explanation about something. Maybe you need an update or a status on something. But the questions we ask are usually for the purpose of getting information. So as a coach, we don't necessarily ask questions to get information, but instead we use questions that get the other person thinking. So in fact, you might do this through a little bit of probing. So you might help them dig a little bit deeper, help them get to the bottom of whatever they're trying to figure out. A powerful question could also be one that challenges somebody in a positive way or inspires them. So one of my favorite powerful questions, and I used this with a group yesterday, is if you had a magic wand, how would you use it in the situation? So you know that you've asked a really powerful question when you see the light bulbs going off for people, or you see them having those kinds of aha moments, or you see them having that kind of reflective behavior that you know you really got them thinking about that one. So there's some really important reasons then that we craft our powerful questions. And in the right situation, a powerful question can really help deepen the connection we have one another, because now there's that authentic interest and curiosity between the two people. So, powerful questions can also be disarming in a situation where there's some defensiveness and some blame, especially in those punitive cultures. And not only that, but powerful questions can help us instill in somebody a better sense of themselves. They can get some better self-awareness, with a really good, powerful question, and helping them connect with their own capabilities or their own competence. It can really do some amazing things to help somebody build better self-esteem or better, self-empowerment. So some really good questions can really help us connect with ourselves in a really powerful way. And of course, all of this really leads to better and more effective solutions. So it's going to be, a real game changer for some people. And in fact, I've seen some pretty incredible transformations happen because of the powerful questions that were being asked. So when we ask a powerful question, we want to make sure that it's open-ended, that we're avoiding questions that begin with the word why. So questions that begin with the word why tend to automatically make people feel like they're in the hot seat, or that they have to explain themselves or justify themselves. And, this is true even when the person asking the question doesn't intend to be threatening or blaming. It's just the use of the word itself, the use of the word why, usually doesn't bring out the best answers from other people. So when we think about it, there's sometimes just not a good reason that something happened. So why is the sky blue? I don't know why the sky is blue, it just is. So we just really need to be careful with this question. So instead we want to ask people questions that begin typically with the word how or what. And these two questions, just really get people thinking in new ways. And that's really what the goal is with coaching. So I had a situation yesterday. I was working with a group, and we were talking about why questions. And the issue was that one of the members in the group wanted to approach one of the staff members and find out why Mr. Smith didn't get a shower that morning. So how might that question be reworded without using why? So, our first inclination is to go to that staff person and say, why didn't Mr. Smith get a shower? But instead, we could say something like, hey, Mary, I noticed that Mr. Smith didn't get his shower this morning. What came up for you during your shift that got in the way of the shower schedule? So you're getting to the same information without using the why question and without putting that staff member on the hot seat, so to speak. And that just really changes the tone of the conversation. So other examples of powerful questions might be, what do you imagine that could be possible in this situation? How might you get started with those new ideas you were talking about? What benefits might be obtained if you decided to take that risk? So again, the questions that begin with a what or a how are the most powerful ones. So lastly, we want to avoid questions that might be considered leading questions. And a leading question is where we sort of tell the other person what answer we want them to give, right? So it's kind of assuming that we know what's best for them. So as an example, we could say, you do want that apple instead of that piece of cake, don't you? Well, that's a leading question, and it doesn't allow the other person to really give, an answer that's authentic to them. So we want to make sure to not use those leading questions. So just as a final takeaway on our powerful questions topic, just remember that one single powerful question can literally be life-changing for somebody. And I've seen that happen many times over. So I've done enough talking for now. I would love to stop the presentation and find out if anybody on the call today has any questions for us.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star and then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you wish to be removed from the question queue, please press the pound sign or hash key. And if you are using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up the handset first before pressing the numbers. At this moment, I'm not showing any questions on the phone. Do you have anything on the web?
I answered a question in the chat box about the 5 whys for critical thinking and trying to substitute some investigative procedures. Yeah, so that's a really good question. We have the root cause analysis that we do, and one of those root cause analysis tools is called the 5 whys, where we want to peel back the onion, so to speak, by asking the word why. Why did Mr. Smith not get a shower? Or why did Mr. Smith fall this morning? So then we answer that question and say, oh, well, he didn't get a shower because, the day shift staff had, 3 new admissions that came in and nobody had enough time. So, we can say, well, why did that happen? Why wasn't the schedule better coordinated? And so we keep answering these questions that start with the word why so that we can get to the bottom of something. And I think that has its place, in quality improvement because we certainly want to get to the bottom of something. And I think the 5 whys tool does have its place there. When we're working, especially one-on-one with somebody, we just want to be careful to avoid that why question because they feel that they're being, put in a place where they have to justify themselves. So I would just really encourage people to think about, the setting and the application of the word why. So if it's for quality improvements and we're in a group and we know what the purpose is, I think it's okay to continue using that 5 why tool. But when we're having a coaching conversation, we want to be careful about the word why.
Lisa, I see there's one more question in the chat. At what point do you decide that coaching someone isn't working?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, so when coaching isn't working, let's see here. There's I think the performance side of coaching, right? So if you're if you have a staff member who you've counseled, maybe you've done the education, you've tried the coaching approach with them, and they're still violating a policy, for example, I think we have that employment side where, we've got the procedures to follow for corrective action and corrective discipline that we need to follow. In terms of a general coaching conversation, as a professional coach, if I'm working with somebody who just doesn't seem to really show up or want to do the work, then I would say to them, we've been meeting, 3 weeks in a row now, and I'm not saying that you're taking any new action steps. You're not making progress towards your goal. Let's talk about, what's going on for you that's getting in the way here because I don't want to waste your time, if you're not getting anything out of this. So I think we can approach that as a coach in that context. But when it comes to some performance issues on the job, I think we need to default to whatever the organization's policies are on that.
That's great, Lisa. This is Michelle, and it looks like we're at 2:30, so I don't think we're going to have time for questions and answers or the rest of your the slides because it took us so long to get going. I'm so sorry about that. Lisa did provide her contact information on one of the slides and some resource information. I'll just give you a couple minutes, a second, to give a final thought. Would that be all right?
Oh, that's great, Michelle. Thank you so much. So just in closing, I would encourage everybody to take a look at the case study slides, and as a group, maybe with your coworkers and colleagues, take a look at that case study and see what you might be able to pick apart from the material today. And feel free to stay in touch. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Leasa, very much, and thank you to all the participants that joined us today. Leasa really gave us some great inspiration to work with our colleagues, building trust and using coaching tools to help support patient safety. So thank you so much. That concludes today's presentation, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Once again, this concludes today's conference. We thank you for participating. You may now disconnect. And you are now